Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Trevor Moffat, and I work with the Improvement Service and Heads of Planning Scotland. Today, we are joined by Richard Dilks from CoMoUK for this webinar on shared mobility and mobility hubs. Our audience today is mainly based of town planners and transport planners within local authorities. And thank you all for joining us.
Hi everybody, I'm really happy to be here. Really pleased to speak to this audience. It's an absolutely critical one in Scotland, and I think Scotland, indeed rest of the UK, but there are some differences in the policy landscape as well as the geographic, socioeconomic ones, etc., as I'll come on to, between Scotland and the rest of the UK. But the whole of the UK is a very interesting juncture here, basically. With the built environment, spatial planning and transport planning converging, at least out there in the real world and in the policy environment too. And I think that's a very positive trend, and one that we're going to need to see more of, actually, if we are to get there on carbon targets, on kilometre reduction targets that Scotland now has, on this big modal shift that we're going to need to have if transport emissions are to be brought anything like under control. And the backdrop to what I'm saying today is that sadly transport emissions are stubbornly high. They've actually increased mildly for the whole of UK since 2012, 2013, and whereas most other sectors, and crucially, if you like, the other big B sectors that have really big emissions have cut theirs dramatically. So there's a big job of work there in transport, and I think spatial planning, the built environment, has an absolutely critical role in doing that. But of course, we're not just doing the things I'm going to be describing here, particularly focusing on mobility hubs through my presentation. You know, we're not just doing that stuff to hit these rather perhaps dry sounding targets about carbon and kilometres and so on. You know, we're also trying to make nicer places to be in and move through, live in, work in, play in, and so on. We're also trying to clean up air, reduce congestion, so have a range of local positive impacts, which are perhaps more tangible to people than these rather big picture abstract points. So let me start going through my slides, and hopefully that's moving along. I'm relying on Trevor or someone to pop in and tell me if it's not. So we are great, thank you, Trevor. So we are coming up to 22 years old. We are a charity. We're for the public benefits of shared transport. So bike share schemes, car share schemes, e-scooter share schemes, not in Scotland, as those trials aren't running in Scotland, but they are in England. And the public benefit bit is the social, economic and environmental benefits of shared transport, specifically, excuse me, get my teeth in. So that's what we always have to be coming back to. It's always what we're always chasing after. We have a work programme with the Scottish Government through Transport Scotland. So we are funded in Scotland by the Scottish Government to work on a range of issues. It changes with each work programme each year, very much including spatial planning and the built environment. And you'll see as I go on through, we have some resources that we've already produced that I want to make you and colleagues you'd like to share them with more aware of, and to use them even more than is already the case. And we're also then working on some emerging fronts where things are fresh. We're doing some fresh research, and you know, things on the ground are developing. And then we're also having an eye to the policy and advocacy point on that slide to the future here. So we're not just thinking, you know, to spring 22 when our current work programme comes to an end. We hope there'll be future work programmes, but we're trying to, you know, think to a bigger picture, the rest of the term of this new Scottish Government at least. Here is a little screenshot. As when the slides come round, I will give Trevor the appropriate web links for these as well. So there's a nice sort of easy package for you there. But to know, we have a CPD course already that is focused on spatial planners who are looking to get up to speed on shared transport. Takes about 3 hours or so to complete. And we've also recently published a suite of materials there focused on Scotland, which we very much want to be used. Otherwise, what's the point in producing them? And we're also very interested in your feedback on any of those materials, and if there are things that we can do to tweak them, things we can do in the future, gaps that you've identified that you think we could perhaps help with, then I really am all ears on that, and would love to talk more about that. So what is shared in a little more depth? We have the ways of sharing the asset, so the bike or the car, over time. You and I are members of the scheme, but we're not on the car, or not on the bike or in the car at the same time. Or there is the lift sharing form of it, ride pooling, car pooling, sometimes called car sharing. The terms can get a bit slippery, but here we're talking about people from different households sharing that car. Of course, at the moment, that is not lawful in Scotland with COVID, so that's really been put in the deep freeze for the last year and a half. But as restrictions lift, then this will hopefully come back. I think it is a really important part of the toolkit. And toolkit is, I think, the right word, because our research again and again finds that shared transport users use other shared modes than simply the ones we're researching with them about, but they also use public transport. They use public transport more than your average Scot. They also walk and cycle more than your average Scot. So there's really a wheel there, a virtuous circle that people go around, where particularly when they transition away from owning a car to using a shared car, but not just that journey, they then use shared transport as part of their set of options. But shared transport is not something people rely on for every journey they make, or the vast majority of journeys they make, because then they sensibly enough, they tip themselves into ownership, and whether that's ownership of a bike or an e-bike, then we count that as a big picture win. Bike share schemes have a real role in taking people through effectively a try before you buy process. And in any case, we find people mix and match between owned bike and shared bike, depending on their journey need. But these are powerful weapons in decarbonising, in decongesting, in raising activity levels. And in particular, this shared bike, it's interesting to note that it gets lapsed cyclists, so those who haven't ridden for a year or more, and also a cohort who haven't ridden for 5 years or more, so significant percentages on both of those. And of course, Scotland is a nation of lapsed cyclists, just like the UK is. The majority of us, 3/4-ish, depending on the research, learned how to cycle at some point. It's just that most of us aren't doing it in any regular way anymore. So I think there's something particularly interesting there. A few snapshot results here from our latest bike share research. This is something we do annually. We do a report bespoke for Scotland. That'll be in the pack of links that will come round. We published this, where are we, 2 or 3 months ago now. So we're just starting to gear up and think about how we do the research next time around to be in field in the autumn. Just to dwell on the health side here for a second, you can see these, I think, really significant percentages on the mental health and the physical health side of it. And I think this is a classic join-up point. I'm here talking to you, yes, about transport, but transport as it flows in now to the built environment. But of course, then here, we're talking about something that cuts across both those things, and where the Scottish Government public policy has some important targets to try and hit that are quite challenging. And shared transport as part of a wider sustainable transport set undoubtedly makes a contribution there. A few more to give you a little bit more of a flavour. Just pick out here the e-bikes point, and that they are even more effective at reducing car use than conventional bike share. I think that fits with all the rest we know about e-bike. You know, they are a twist on the theme. They do a different thing in the sense of including people who would physically be put off conventional cycling, but also including journeys, and thereby people that otherwise wouldn't be attractive to the majority of people because of hilliness or because of length or because of effort level and arriving sweaty. Switching on to four wheels, again, just some highlights from our research. This is not a comprehensive download by any means, and again, the link will be in what comes through. We have just published this also in the last few weeks, and likewise, we're starting to think about what we focus on with the research next time around. There is again a bespoke report for Scotland on this, alongside a set covering the rest of the country. And you can see here why I was talking about decarbonisation earlier. So we have the tailpipe effect with a much higher percentage of EVs, a much cleaner set of cars than the general Scottish fleet. But we also have the impact of taking private cars off the road. So these displacement figures come from what people report to us of the behaviour changes they've made on the back of switching to Car Club. And these findings are very consistent. So although these are the latest, they're from the very end of last year. The two changes with COVID were on public transport use. Of course, there was so little public transport use, that wasn't a comparison that was sensible to make anymore. And on mileage, where again, mileage fell off a cliff, but of course it did for very obvious reasons. But otherwise, it was remarkable what a consistent set of data this is over the 10 years plus now that we've been conducting this research. And you know, it really is a powerful tool. And it's one that, in terms of Car Club, I think has really reached a critical mass stage in Scotland, particularly 2-3 years ago, in terms of number of users, which is very heartening to see. And there are some numbers to back that up. The efficiencies here are enormous. I sometimes get the question, quite fairly, especially when you don't know the numbers, thrown at me of, well, aren't we, you know, in danger of having lots and lots of these shared cars around, which would then rather defeat the point. But actually, there are only it's about 6,000 or so Car Club cars in the whole of the UK. So when we compare that to, I should say, cars and vans in the whole of the UK, the equivalent privately owned number is 38.8 million. So I think we're some way off getting swamped, and of course that's partly because far fewer people are using the shared than the owned option, but it's also because of the efficiency ratios in the shared option. We did a piece of work on London, which is, you know, of course, the densest part of the country, and that found that we were in a sort of 90 to 100 users per car range. We haven't done that equivalent work in Scotland, but it would certainly be a lower figure than that. But compare that to a privately owned car, where you'd be sort of struggling to get to 3. So these options, that's fleshing out shared transport a little, and I hope spurring some thoughts about the role that shared schemes of that kind might play in spatial planning. And then I wanted to move on to hubs specifically. So there's our definition up on the screen. What we see these hubs as doing, and by the way, the term mobility hub is a shorthand that I'm not too precious about. So if we think of these as journey hubs or travel hubs, or frankly, call them what we will, the important bit is what they do. We're talking about a place that is designed to be a place. So it has some identifier, ideally physical and digital. It is easy to find and navigate to and from. It brings together, crucially, a shared option or options, public transport option or options, and active travel option or options, all into the one place. And of course, you can scale this up to be very large, but it can also be very small. We can be talking here about you know, a bus stop with a little bit of cycle parking and one shared car, perhaps a shared electric car in a parking bay. And there you go, you know, obviously a hublet with a sign, and ideally, of course, building into a wider network to travel planning and journey purchase and so on, all things that make things easy for people. But you know, the core physical ingredients, that's how we see it. This fleshes this out a little and starts to, I think, talk to the wider benefits of these hubs. For example, safety, and making these nice places and safe places to be, to dwell, or to interchange, or to undertake other functions. So you can see the Amazon type pickup drop-off lockers there, and the e-cargo bike. There could be a more substantial role for freight and logistics in some of these, I think. We could be thinking about a consumer-facing front door, if you like, to bigger ones with perhaps a B2B consolidation centre type operation around the back. And also the community function here, as mentioned down the bottom right. So with the rise of working from home, people spending more time in their communities as a result, we've seen a big upsurge in interest in these, not just as mobility and transport hubs, but as hubs. And are they also places where remote working is taking place, where community facilities could be provided or consolidated upon? Do they have a natural fit with the village hall in a rural setting, or healthcare facilities, for example? We've done an introductory guide, again it'll be in the links that come through, and some of you may have seen it already, which identified this typology, so 6 different types. We're not saying we've cracked it and that's all there could ever be, but from all our own research and insight gathering, and here is a good moment to mention that a good part of this we've been working on through an EU programme called Share North, which enables us to have a very dense and rich network with other continental European partners in that programme. So we've been able to draw on their experiences, their data, etc. You can see pictures there from Bremen at the top, and Groningen in the Netherlands, respectively, top to bottom. So these are the ones, the categories that seem to us to make sense. You'll see there they range across size, and you'll also see they range across location. So this is not just an urban or denser suburban phenomenon. You know, there's potential interest here across a wide range of settings. We have then moved on from producing introductory guidance to having an accreditation standard, and in fact last week we were able to launch the accreditation of our first hub, a hublet in an outer London borough of Redbridge. And so we have this accreditation standard which takes up the typology and then applies essential and desirable criteria to each of them, and comes to a ranking of gold, silver or bronze. We took care to try to strike a balance between being realistic, very easy to demand the earth on everything, and gold plate everything, but you know, it just won't happen in the real world, but to have some meaningful standards. And I do think there is a challenge here on hubs to have some sufficient quality standards, both in terms of clarity, that people understand what a hub is and what it isn't, and also just in terms of provision and quality, what is there. There is a lipstick on a pig danger here, and I've seen some examples, not in Scotland actually, but of people saying, I'm doing a hub, you know, and actually they're doing a car park with a little bit extra. That's not what we're talking about here. Which isn't to say that you can't have hubs in car parks. You know, park and ride could be a really interesting location for some of these, but it is to say that genuinely these have to be boosting sustainable options and suppressing or not providing for less sustainable options. A bit then on transport policy, and now move on to spatial planning policy before moving towards wrapping up. I'm very much looking forward to questions and discussion here. So some of this is blindingly obvious, I like to think. The picture there for interest is Hamburg, and there we have interface for the shared car fleet, bus, cycle network at an S-Bahn station, so only, you know, a more outer suburban rail network with lots of bike parking, including shared bike parking. So these things, they boost the use of the sustainable modes at them. They therefore help suppress the use of less sustainable modes, and of course they can directly remove space for less sustainable modes. Our little hublet that we accredited last week has taken over what was formerly just the car parking space. But as you scale these things up, of course, you can go bigger on that. So we're having interesting conversations now with stakeholders in the NHS, in the property development sphere, who are looking at developing bigger sites. And are, in many ways, you can characterise it as they're eyeing up how can they cut the size of a car park. Car parks are very expensive things to produce in all sorts of ways, literally financially expensive, but of course also expensive in opportunity cost. And also, whatever you do with a car park, it's never going to be that wonderful a place to hang out. And so they have a significant visual impact on the wider site also. There's also a thing here about connecting these things together. So, over time, we hope that we will see hubs develop in Scotland, sure, but then the question of networking these hubs. This is already happening south of the border in England. There's a paradox to draw out here. So where south of the border in England, there is quite a lot of Department for Transport investment going into these hubs through a programme called Future Transport Zones and another one called Transforming Cities Fund. That's being done despite there actually being no positive policy environment for them at all. They're not defined in planning policy in any way, shape, form, never mind encouraged, or even better, mandated. Scotland is in some senses the inverse in that the policy environment is looking quite promising. We're certainly not there yet. I'll come on to this later, but there really is seems to be some appetite from Scottish government on this to fix in some different policy. But we haven't had that that taxpayer subsidy investment going in. So south of the border, we do have, and we in fact run a network meeting on this, a group of local authorities who are already planning out networks of hubs. And this is where it starts to get really interesting, as you can think about coverage over an area, you can think about compound effects, and you can think about area and network effects. And the more powerful those can be, the more chance we have of tempting people out of their owned cars and keeping them out, and perhaps in some places starting with multi-car households and getting that down from 3 to 2 to 2 to 1, and and from 1 to 0. Spatial planning. So I do think this fits into a lot of things that are going on at the moment. Is this a way to do 15-20 minute neighbourhoods? I would argue it is. It's not the only part of it, but it can be a really important part. Low traffic neighbourhoods, a close cousin concept. Also, I think these have a real role there in boosting health and wellbeing, active travel levels, as I've already said, and in also thinking about this from a transport to key sites perspective. So a little bit, as we might be more familiar from bus planning, for example, how do we get people to and from the hospital, the employment sites? And we've had a trend over the last 20 years in particular, haven't we, of building those places not in the centre, or even particularly near the centre, actually much more commonly out of the centre, and a lot of those have sadly in reality become really significant private car trip generators, which in turn makes them private car ownership generators. So we did a piece of work a year and a half ago or so now, but the basis of it very much still holds, about the potential scale of shared transport in Scotland. And I won't drag through these figures, but you can see how big they are. And so you can see just how much is in potential reach here. I'm not saying that's what we can get to by 2025 or next year, etc. But my point is, there's so much headroom to be eaten into here, and we are seeing, with this membership growth, we're seeing some of that happen, but we would love to see a lot more. I mentioned about the policy environment in Scotland, sort of being on the move, and MPF4 and SDPR2 are our two key ways of engaging with this. And it's not to take you through all the detail of this. I'm happy to chat more about this we very much like to continue engagement around this debate. But to note that, these 4 headings, I hope I've at least demonstrated some of how hubs and a shared transport approach, a sustainable transport approach more broadly, can deliver on all 4 of these. A point which, of course, we've made into the consultations to date. We'll very much be continuing to engage with Scottish Government on this. So Bremen, where it all got going back in 2003, just to set a bit of context on here, went from having a little handful of hubs at that launch day up to now having many hundreds, most of which are the smaller end, but lots are also a significant number at medium and larger scale. Being done in an integrated way. It's important to note. You see the shared cars in the picture in the top right there. So this is all part of other city programs there about car sharing, about taking private car parking space out, about bike sharing, and about the data flowing in between all those so that the impacts can be understood. A different twist on things here, just to give a flavour of things from Europe. So this is Vienna. This is one that is being put in one of the network by the public transport network there. So you see the integration with the tram there. Notice also the lockers there for parcels and the e-cargo bike fleet also. And then getting a little closer to home, there are a couple of schemes we've been talking to, and I'm sure, and I hope there'll be more, where private car parking is being suppressed or eliminated. It's very limited on this Meadowbank site, with again this suite of options coming in, some in hubs, some outside hubs, to give people other options. And you might say, well, we can't really fail to do it in a site like that, can we? Which, I mean, actually, yes, of course, we can fail to do that, but it is just as a place where stuff really should be happening, and some of the ground conditions are there. But there are also other sites like this one outside of Edinburgh in the Lothians, where it's sort of becoming a turnaround story already, actually. More generous car parking ratio to start with, as you'll see there, the German comparison figure, but now very much on the march, wanting to do a hub, got a lot of the ingredients assembled. I'd like to think we'd be able to accredit that when they've got everything there. Aspiration for 2 more hublets across the site, and I hope that will turn into a nice, encouraging case study. Certainly, we were very hungry for case studies. It's chicken and egg. We'll be turning the English ones into case studies as soon as it's credible to do so. And I hope that'll give more confidence. I'm aware that simply talking to people about continental Europe or the United States, where these also are quite common, only carries you so far. So some ideas about future opportunities. We have that policy environment I've been talking about. We have this shift of travel patterns, particularly around the commute. Also people relocating out of urban centres to a degree, and if you like, the sort of perennial nut to crack of peri-urban on out into rural mobility and how to make that more sustainable. And I think hubs and shared transport can make real contribution to that. These are some of the resources we've got, and this is part of what will come through to you. How can we help? Well, we have all of that stuff on the stocks, but then we also have an offer of one-to-one training, workshops, advice. We have an officer, the post is currently vacant, but we are going to be recruiting for it as soon as we can, ideally this week, certainly next, to fill that. And then that post holder is there to help with training, workshops, advice. That's what the post is funded to do. So it's very much a resource I'd encourage you to think about taking up, talk to colleagues about how to take that up. Thank you very much for your time. I know it's been quite a lot to get through, and I know we're all frankly bored to tears of being on online things, but at least they enable us to connect, which otherwise would have been a real struggle. Really look forward to people's questions, the debate. Thanks again for having me.